Okay, see the box that we're recording? So I'm going to begin with roll call today. Alabama. Arkansas.
Brett Leach.
Illinois. Indiana. Adam let me know he might join an hour late. Iowa, Orrin Jones. Kentucky. John's not going to make it. Louisiana.
Jason Olzak.
Manitoba.
Jillian St. George.
Michigan.
Caitlin Barnes.
Minnesota. Mississippi.
Houston Havens.
Missouri.
Reed Vigut.
Ohio.
Mike Irvin.
Ontario. Saskatchewan.
Catherine Conkin.
Okay, great. Tennessee.
Jamie Federson.
Hey, Jamie, made it.
Yeah, Joe canceled. We'll talk
Great.
later.
Okay. Wisconsin.
Taylor Finger.
Canadian Wildlife Service. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Dave Scott.
Bird Banding Laboratory. USDA APHIS Wildlife Services. USGS.
Lisa Webb.
Lisa, great. Okay, that's roll call. Now for introductions, I'll begin. Oh, hey, Seth. Okay, I'll get you down. Introductions. I'll begin by introducing the Kentucky DFW staff that are hosting the meeting. They have Kylie Bosch and Jillian Murphy. Anybody else, Kylie and Jillian?
We have Kim Odom. She is also a technician.
Okay, welcome. Thanks for joining. Let's see, who else wants to go for introductions? Just raise your hand, I'll call on you. Doug, you did join us. Go ahead.
I did, yeah, I'm here, Orrin. And then we got Sam Klimas here as well.
Okay, great. Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, I see Brad Cohen and Corey Highway from Tennessee Tech are joining us.
Okay. Welcome, guys. Jillian, this is one thing I could really use help with is the guest list. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, Louisiana's got Owen Best, and I don't see anybody else.
Okay, thanks, Jason and Owen. Let's see, Dave, go ahead.
We got Pam and I think Josh.
Great.
That's
Welcome,
who I
Pam.
saw anyways.
Okay. Thank you. Caitlin.
Michigan has Ben Lukanen.
All right, welcome, Ben. And Nick.
Hey guys, I'm Happett Office, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Joining Nick. All right, anybody else we're missing? Any other introductions?
Hey, Orrin, this is Mike Brazier with Ducks Unlimited. I think we also have Nick Biasini. I think I saw him. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for joining, Mike and Nick. And for the reminder, I apologize. I forgot about you.
Okay. This time.
Yeah. Okay. let's see. So we've got introductions and roll call. I will share our agenda really quickly here. All right. Is the agenda coming through, or are you seeing my notes?
Seeing your notes,
That-
Warren.
My notes? Okay. Hold on. Okay, this should look better, does it? All right.
Yep.
So we have pretty busy agenda. We're going to start off with an update from Dave, and then we'll hear from Reed on his master's work. Then a quick update from Jamie on the National Dove Task Force. And Mike Brazier is going to tell us about a duck population estimation workshop. Then I'm not sure about item number 6, given that John and Adam aren't going to be on, but perhaps Mike and I and Dave can shed a little light on this.
Yeah, JB called me and asked me if I could help out there, so.
Great. Okay. And then we'll have 2 regulation specific items about the 2-tier working group that Houston's going to cover, and then the black-bellied whistling duck working group. And then we'll finish up like we typically do with just a brief discussion on our agenda for the September meeting. Does anybody have any questions or additions to the agenda? All right, hearing none, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Dave Scott for the Fish and Wildlife Service update.
I'll try to be quick. I'm sure some of the other topics will be talking about what's going on too, but probably the most important thing that's on everybody's mind is the status of rules. I've gotten some number of calls and inquiries where we are. And I think the bottom line is a reminder of the system is broken, and it's the same broken as it has been the last several years. So we are concerned, but we're well aware of the process and working with the new administration. So right now, the final rule is with the DOI Secretary's office. From there, it has to go to OIRA. And everyone's being made aware of the shortness of time. So like September 1st was 7 weeks from this past Monday. So we'll keep you posted. And then if anything happens that where we don't think we're going to make it, you guys will be like the second to know. The season selection rule has been drafted. It's an internal in Fish and Wildlife Service, but it's ready to follow up with the final once that moves to the right stage. We had an update just yesterday on the new process, which the Doge folks who are looking to do deregulatory things, get rid of rules, when they were made aware of the new process, which is the policy memo thing that we've all talked about over the last several years. They were very supportive of that. But we had a ruling from OMB that rule, at least the process of setting that rule, is considered significant. So that's going to make it slower than we had hoped. Don't have any update on what that looks like yet. We just learned that yesterday. Recently, I sent out a note reminding folks to get your light goose conservation order data from this past spring. And some of you, I think 4 of the 10 states that have that have provided it, but I encourage the others to do it as soon as you can reasonably provide it. As soon as we get that, we will provide it to Stephen Olson to get it included in the HIP and data books. So, it'll become available whenever, but if it might be available at the next big update, depending on when I get your data. I also sent out a zone change reminder memo. letting council, copied you guys know that if you're going to make changes, we need to have those changes identified and descriptions by the 29th of August, which is a Friday. And several of you have also replied, or your council member has replied, that you're not going to be making changes. I appreciate knowing that too. So I'm not on the lookout for something. And you know, the big, beautiful bill passed, but I wanted to remind folks that that's a reconciliation bill. It's not a budget bill. And now the Senate and the House have begun working on appropriation bills this past week. The House released a markup of the interior appropriation bill, I think maybe yesterday, sometime earlier this week. It would indicate that Fish and Wildlife Service overall would be possibly slated for about a 6.5% cut for FY26. The Senate version suggested a similar cut around 6%. Hasn't been released yet. So just keeping you in the loop on that. And I can take any questions if you want. I will remind folks, some of you know this already, that I have an eye surgery scheduled for next Wednesday. So I might be out for a little bit of time. Not sure how that's going to play out, but hopefully it's a relatively short amount of time.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave? Hey, Dave,
Frazier.
I have, go ahead, Frazier.
So 2 questions, Dave. So remind me what you know about the release of the waterfowl status report. I think we're targeting like early September. You think in the first week of September?
First week of September.
Okay. And then is there any feeling right now whether the AHM report will be released alongside that?
The 2 dates that we got from Ken before he left was that first week of September. Basically, status reports earlier in the week, like the 2nd or so, and the AHM by the 5th. So I would anticipate the week of Labor Day that they'll all come out ahead of our meeting. Hopefully together if it's available, but sometime by the 5th of September.
Okay, thank you.
Dave, question for you. The federal budget, is that for the current fiscal year, or is that looking ahead to the future fiscal year?
That was for the numbers, the potential 6% cuts for FY26 that they're working on.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Dave?
Can I ask another one?
Go ahead, Mike.
Your limit's up.
I'm gonna ask it anyway.
Go ahead.
The final rule that's on in the secretary's office, how does that differ from the other one that you described, which is the season selections? Clarify those for me.
So the final rule, follows a preliminary and the proposed. We address public comments, and then it provides all the details for which states should have to make their season selections. But they've already, as normal, made their season selections. We've drafted that. Some states need that to be published to enforce their rules.
Okay.
So
okay,
it just has all the details in it.
Okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. Because, I get questions every now and then. I want to make sure I'm giving the right answer.
Call me.
All right. Any other questions for Dave? Thank you, Dave. Look forward to hearing from you in August and look forward to seeing those reports in early September.
Me too.
Next up, we'll turn it over to Reed to talk about his master's work using drones for counting ducks. Go ahead, Reed.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. So today I'll be talking about my master's work. We did kind of developed a system to fly drones, collect imagery, and then try and automate counting of birds on conservation areas across Missouri. And And let me share. Button. There we go. And then are you guys seeing that in the, I guess,
Yep.
slideshow
Looks good,
view?
Reed. Looks good.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll be talking about what the work and the project for my master's, but I'll kind of skip over or briefly kind of talk through methods and results and kind of give more of an update on where the project's at and kind of like what software has been developed in terms of the project and what's out there for other people that they can use or go look at and play around with a little bit more. If you're at the Duck Symposium in Portland, I gave a more kind of in-depth presentation over methodology and some of the calculations behind the work. But this will kind of focus more on the overall idea and the software behind it. So the big picture behind the overall project was we're trying to just look at the feasibility of using unoccupied aerial systems or drones, or, just really aerial photos from any sort of platform, and then artificial intelligence for both wetland and specifically waterfowl monitoring. And so the waterfowl monitoring aspect of things comes from the intensely managed wetlands across Missouri that we can hold a large amount of birds in a very small area, especially during freeze up, and sometimes estimating and counting the number of birds on those areas can be really time consuming. And so we really just wanted to try and improve the precision and accuracy and efficiency of waterfowl monitoring via drones is how we did that. And so the product we were trying to create was software that would be able to identify and count ducks in the imagery, either in real time or near real time. So if it couldn't do it like on a computer connected to the drone, then maybe it would be able to do it really quickly after you got back to the office and you were able to take the images from the drones and stick them in the computer. The other aspect was the wetland monitoring. And so with that, there are a couple different kind of habitat components of it. One was, are we able to locate and identify invasive plant species? Both, really more obvious invasives and then maybe some more cryptic or, hidden plant species. And so are we able to do that? So one of the species we were looking at was reed canary grass. And then beyond that, kind of in partnership with NRCS to look at just vegetation communities on WRE properties, are we able to look and quantify plant communities via aerial imagery and kind of mapping them with the drone as well? And so that big project was separated between myself and quite a few computer science or students in the computer science department at the University of Missouri. And so my thesis focused kind of on three main research questions. What factors influence waterfowl behavior in response to abundance surveys? That's drone and helicopter or crewed aircraft surveys. And then what flight parameters and environmental factors worked best, and which one kind of influenced waterfowl detection, and are there better conditions or worse conditions to survey in? And finally, so those first two questions have been published from my work, and so I'll provide links and everything to that at the end. And then the third question is, what survey parameters impacted accuracy and precision of abundance estimates? And these ones we were looked at as an individual wetland pool, not necessarily an entire area, but kind of an individual management unit. And so for the work, we used two drones. At the time, it was the newest and best DJI Mavic drones, DJI Mavic Pro 2 and the DJI Phantom 4 are the two drones that were used in the project. Mostly selected for image quality and ease of use. Nowadays, there's a lot more selection than there was 5 years ago when the project kind of really was getting going and we were looking at what equipment options we had. And so the study sites, we flew them across the wetland conservation areas, the intentionally managed ones that are part of the draw system in Missouri. So they all contain portions of refuge during the hunting season, and they all function as stopover and winter sites for large concentrations of waterfowl on small areas. And these are just some examples of some of the vegetation communities that existed on the wetlands. So we had forested, some of them were more green tree reservoir oak forests in southeast Missouri, but a lot of the forested also were large cottonwoods and willows. We also had scrub like buttonbush, and then lotus, standing corn, moist soil, harvested crop, and then open water were the categories of vegetation that we looked at for waterfowl detection in. And so our UAS surveys, they consisted of 4 different altitudes, ranging from 15 to 60 or 15 to 120 meters in height, which is the maximum height of 400 feet. But then we really focused on the 15 to 60 meter range for our waterfowl surveys with the camera quality. So we flew them at 4 different altitudes, before, during, and after the hunting season to get changes in vegetation communities, potential waterfowl response changes during different times of year, and then some of the different plumage characteristics across the seasons as well. We broke waterfowl into different categories for behavior: mallards, other ducks, and then geese. And we conducted our flights over the refuge pools from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. So that was, when the sun was highest in the sky. So we had minimal shadow coverage from the vegetation in the pools. And then for the behavior portions, we allowed a recovery period before we did the next flight to try and allow the waterfowl to return to normal behaviors. And so in summary, of the waterfowl response, the smaller drone, the Mavic Pro 2, or similar size UAS, did not impact waterfowl behavior during the survey. So we didn't detect any behavioral responses from overall the UAS survey compared to the before survey behavior, whether that was ducks, geese, or mallards, time of year, or the survey altitude. And so that paper's been published, and just to kind of emphasize that point, the picture on the slide there, it's a bunch of ducks sleeping, and this was 15 meters above the ducks when we took this picture, and you can see that they're not really concerned about the drone. And so then moving on to the next part, which was the waterfowl detection and the AI side of things. So for detection, there's kind of 2 questions. One is the animal available to be counted? Is it visible in the image? So that could be obstructed by vegetation. It could be flown out of view of the camera. Different factors like that impact whether it's even in the image to be counted. And from there, the machine learning kind of has 3 outcomes that are possible. A true positive, which means there is a duck there and it counts it as a duck, which are those green boxes. A false negative, which would be where it does not count a duck that is actually there, indicated by those blue ovals. And then a false positive, which would lead to overcounting, which is when it thinks that like vegetation or maybe reflection of light in the image, it thinks that is a duck, and so then it leads to overestimation of the birds. So it's counting birds that aren't actually there. And so looking at that, just differentiating among different factors that influence that. So as you can imagine, as we get higher, the height, the altitude, the detection decreases, or the availability of the bird. So what you can see as a bird decreases. Vegetation cover type has a large impact on whether or not you can see birds in the image, with things such as forest and scrub habitat covering up a lot more birds than open water does. And then sky conditions, so whether it's cloudy or sunny, how much of a difference does that actually make? And it's definitely compounded by the vegetation cover type, but in and of itself, the sky condition across the vegetation types didn't make as large of a difference. And so, so that was whether you could see animals in the images, birds in the images, and then how well did the computer do at actually correctly counting birds? So again, kind of looking at it between height, which is the graphs on the left, sky condition in the middle, and then the vegetation cover type on the right. Again, as height increased, the number of true detections, which is in the top graph, decreased as height increased, and then as height increased, the number of false positives, which is the bottom graph, that also increased. Again, sky condition didn't make that much of a difference on the false detections or the correct detections. And then the vegetation cover type, again, had the biggest impact, with Lotus leading to a lot of false positive detections, and then open water having the best correct detections. And so then we developed an algorithm to kind of correct for the image counts based on the conditions that we expected to fly in and based on those correct and false detections. And so we were able to decrease the percent error by about half with this algorithm. And then these are the kind of ultimate average correction factors that came out of that correction. And so you can see that for the most part, our correction factors are higher, so we were still undercounting birds. But in reality, it was only, a correction factor that ranged from 1.1 to 1.4 across most vegetation cover types. The biggest one was the forested cover types, just because of the amount of coverage of the birds by the trees. So then the last piece was, so now that we know the birds aren't disturbed by the drone surveys, and we're able to detect and accurately count birds in the individual images, are we able to then efficiently survey the wetlands? So we simulated different wetland pools with different cover types, different waterfowl distributions across them, different survey altitudes, different intensities of the surveys, and then different survey designs. A lot of factors went into these simulations. And so, not surprisingly, waterfowl density, as waterfowl density increased, the precision of the surveys also increased. And then as wetland coverage increased, so the percent of the wetland that we surveyed, as that increased, we also then were able to increase the precisions, which was expected. Again, same thing for accuracy. So as the density of the birds increased, the accuracy also increased. And as we surveyed more of the wetlands, those also increased across all the different survey designs that we used. And so in summary from those results, survey precision was most impacted by survey design and waterfowl density, survey accuracy by sampling intensity and waterfowl density, and then survey efficiency. To get the most efficient survey, it was very much dependent on your survey design. And so efficiency was kind of calculated as what are we able to accurately and precisely survey while reducing the amount of time that it would require to survey. And so with that, if you just wanted a general waterfowl count based on our models, the 60 meters in survey height with random transects through about half the wetland, which should take, give or take, 6 to 8 minutes per 100 acres. That would be efficient. And then for species abundance, we had to get quite a bit lower, 15 meters. But we only necessarily need to survey 35% of the wetland because for the species abundance, surveying lower, our detections tended to be more accurate. So we got a better estimate with less of the wetland surveyed. So then we went through, the process of trying to develop everything and form everything into a single package of software. So the tools, flight survey software for the drones are important. We needed to incorporate the waterfowl intelligence model or artificial intelligence models, the waterfowl detection, species classification, as well as what some other folks in the group were working on with the vegetation community models. and then ultimately try and develop, user interfaces for ease of use so that we're not having to have wetland managers or, even state biologists try and program everything into what, looks like from the early versions of computers trying to get the waterfowl counts. And so, with the flight planning software, just to fly the drones and collect the imagery, there's a lot of different commercial options out there that weren't necessarily available 5 years ago when the project began either. And all these commercial products, they have different capabilities. They're kind of all slightly built for different uses. They also all have different drones that they support or don't support. And so that's kind of up to the user to determine which one works with their drone for their needs. But we ended up building our own because at the time there wasn't really anything out there for exactly what we were looking at. So the computer science department ended up building their own app. It only supports the DJI Mavic 2 because that's the drone that we had and that's all we needed to build it for. So it does still function, but it does only support older versions of drones at this time. It also allowed us to then, preset image conditions. So we did quite a bit of work that wasn't ever in a thesis or necessarily published. Actually, I think the computer science group published some papers on it, but we looked at different camera parameters to try and figure out what also then gave us the best images. So we had some different preset options and the ability in the app to go in and select different preset camera options. The next piece was, building the artificial intelligence models. So trying to create an interface where we're able to label and classify waterfowl to develop the training and testing data. So it takes a lot of data to develop these models. One of our training data sets was 335 gigabytes of images, just under 22,500 images is what we ended up as for a labeling data or a training data set for the models. So two different softwares that we use and are available. We on the right, it's called Label Me. It's an open source software that the computer science department was able to install on a server they had, and then anybody was able to go in and just draw boxes around ducks in different images, labeling them all as a bird. So that was kind of the first piece, and that was just to develop a software that would be able to develop a software that'd be able to just detect birds in the images and count the birds. And then as time went on and we started developing the species classification model, we then developed an interface that would go through either detections that were already labeled in the Label Me program for birds, or when the detection model got good enough, we would just use the detection model results, and then it would just pull up the individual birds in the image in this box, and you were just able to click on the species that then showed, and you were able to label the birds label the birds to species and sex that way, and it worked really well. And so in total, we labeled over 105,000 individuals as birds and classified over 12,000 ducks to different ducks and geese to different species. 21 classes, so seven that we labeled to species and sex, and then 7 that were species only. For example, geese, we only labeled to species because we can't tell the sex from the image. So then, now that we've developed these tools to build the artificial intelligence detection models and classification models, and we've built the models, then we need an interface to be able to run them, to both count and then ID and classify the birds. And so this is kind of prototype number 1 of the interface that we've built. So it's got a few different inputs. You're able to just upload your folder of images to the interface and then preview images and go through them. You're able to select what detection model you'd like, input information that's important to the models, such as the altitude or the ground sampling resolution, the resolution of the image, so that it kind of knows which different model. We built different models for different heights so that it had an idea of how large to expect the birds in the images, which really improved the accuracy of the detection models. So it's just got some different inputs so that you can get the best model you're able to. So this one was built a while ago on some of the older models, and then we updated some models, but then it would also give you a preview of what it classified as species. And if you had the ground truth as well, like if you had labeled images, it could also classify them as incorrect detections. So you were able to get testing data and know how accurate your model was really quick. Here's an example of it running on a bunch of birds on ice. And so the last piece that we wanted to then do was we had models built for NRCS for habitat detection and vegetation classification, and then we had these ones for waterfowl detection. And so we wanted to combine the two in a way that we were then able to look at bird habitat use or build better detection models for the different habitats, adjust images better, or detections and estimates better for the different habitats using those different correction factors we developed for the different vegetation cover types. And so the idea there was that it would take the habitat segmentation piece of things and it would take the waterfowl detection and classification piece, and it would be able to overlay them. So we'd count birds and then we'd label or we'd identify the vegetation cover types as such, and then ultimately it would come out to where we're able to classify habitat and birds, and so then the output would ultimately be able to give you an estimate of number of birds in the habitat type. And so current outputs of the software, so when you're playing around with the software, it gives you just CSV files that you can open in Excel, nothing fancy. It gives you the vegetation cover type. So what we wanted was percentage and area of each vegetation cover type for each image, and total area, waterfowl detection, total waterfowl detected, and then an estimate of abundance. Kind of break it down like that. So, you know, are we able to then really estimate waterfowl in the different vegetation cover types? That was the kind of, I guess, big dream of the project. We didn't quite make it there to where we were able to combine vegetation and waterfowl detection and give you these really nice fancy outputs. So where we actually ended up and then resources. And so these are links to the different resources. I also have a Word document that I'll be sending out that has the links in it as well. But ultimately, one piece we completed was the drone flight software, again, specific to the DJI Mavic 2 Pro. Like I said, it's at this point, it's kind of unnecessary to build your own. There's a lot of other commercial or open source drone mapping software options that are compatible with a wide variety of drones. We did develop a waterfowl detection and classification software that also has a little bit of an interface. So ultimately, the behind the scenes piece of everything, there's a full pipeline capable of waterfowl detection and classification. You're able to download the raw software from GitHub. It does run on older versions of Python. And so with the department currently, we're running into issues where older versions of Python may not be supported anymore. So there are issues with it at this time. And then we also have this prototype interface created. It does need quite a bit of work still, but it is out there and you are able to use it and kind of look at it and see what it looks like. And then we do have these two tools, the waterfowl labeling tool for the general detections, the Label Me tool, and the species classification tool. Again, both available to download off of GitHub, and then you're able to customize them yourself, or ask your computer folks to I customize them. You're able to change species options and things like that in those labeling tools to then train models for different species as well. We also have a demo online, so it's actually available online. You're able to go to a website, pull in some images, run the model, and see what the outputs look like. I did notice last time I used it, it was not the best model, but I did confirm that they did put a less accurate and a little bit older model into the demo when they had created the demo a while ago. So there are updated models, and you can get those off of the GitHub from these links up above that one. But if you want a quick, just kind of play around with it, that's your best option. And then the vegetation classification, there is software that we've developed that you're able to run through the Python interface, but there's no graphic, fun user interface for it, and it kind of got paused in development with graduations of students and people leaving. That's kind of what happened to the whole project, really, is graduations, retirements, different jobs, people moving on, and so it kind of paused at the last few stages of the project. But yeah, so there's no real pipeline for the vegetation, and it's not incorporated into the waterfowl detection pipeline. But I think it would ultimately be something very useful for a lot of us if it was able to get pushed across the finish line. And so with that, this was a big project with a lot of people involved on it. The Department of Conservation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the refuges, NRCS, and the private landowners that let us use their wetlands and gave us money for development of that piece of things, and then USGS and the co-op units and the University of Missouri for my graduate work. And then, of course, yeah, the private landowners that gave us access and the wetland managers that led us out onto the MDC's wetlands and into the refuge areas during times when nobody was allowed back there. So thanks to them for that. And so that's my MDC email, which I'm sure most of you have, but happy to take any questions and any discussion on it. So.
Thanks, Reed. I was really looking forward to this and didn't disappoint. I enjoyed that. It was super interesting. I'll open the floor to questions for Reed. Please raise your hand and we'll call on you. Reed, while we're waiting for questions, I have one. Were you able to compare the abundance counts with the drones to abundance counts from the, let's say, the traditional ground surveys?
No, not really. We never really got to the point where we were really running true estimates of waterfowl on the areas with the drones. The project was really focused on development of all the different pieces to be able to do that, and we never got to the point to be able to do that. There were a couple times where when we were flying the drone, I'd just ask the manager and then see what the algorithm came back with later, but we never actually truly compared them.
Would you feel comfortable saying, do you think they'll be in the ballpark, or do you think there's more research needed there?
I mean, I think a lot of it's just going to depend on the observer themselves, and I think it's going to be more that aspect of things. I mean, we had one observer one of the area managers, granted, this was one of the ones that we were flying a survey on an open lake with a bunch of ice late in the season. And I said, how many birds are out there? And he said, more than 72,000, but less than 72,500. And the drone estimate came back to 72,336. Not saying that's going to be every count, but.
Wow. Yeah, I'm impressed. Do you plan to try to advance this with MDC and try to further pursue implementing drones as the survey method for non-breeding season waterfowl surveys?
I would like to. I mean, I think it's very close. There's some challenges and some hiccups, and like I said, it's tough to figure out exactly where to move forward with it, just because some of this stuff is built on really old versions of Python, and with a lot of the new artificial intelligence models and things out there. Um, what might be better, what might be worse. So there's some of those conversations happening with our IT department and kind of trying to get the feel for how we want to proceed with it. And then I know Arkansas Game and Fish is interested in something similar, and we've had discussions about, a collaborative project to try and get some of these pieces over the finish line. So.
Interesting. Any other questions for Reed? All right, I got one last one for you. I was really surprised that you could get within 15 meters and the birds didn't respond. Did that differ by species at all, or I'm shocked. Is that like due to the size of the drone, or what's the story with that?
Yeah, so the drone itself was very small. The drone itself was probably about that big when it was fully deployed, including the propellers. It was definitely noisy, like you could definitely hear it. I mean, it didn't really seem to affect too much. What affected it more was if you flew up high and then were over the birds and then descended towards the board, descended straight down towards the birds, or if you flew it more erratically, then the birds would respond to it. But when it was in its little pre-programmed transects, then yeah, for the most part, we didn't. Statistically, we didn't see any differences. Anecdotally, I will say, the white-fronted geese, they weren't super scared of it, but they certainly kind of seemed to become the most alert.
Interesting. That's really fascinating to me. Jason's got his hand up. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, in regards to efficiency, what were you looking at for processing time and the size of these wetlands? So go out in the field, get your data. What are you looking at as far as getting your estimates in timing?
Yeah. So the wetlands in size, they ranged from about, some of them were as small as 40 acres. Most of them were about 80 to 120 acres on the individual pool basis, but then there might be, 4 wetland pools of 100 acres that we're surveying for the whole conservation area that we're in refuge. Um, so as far as then, collecting the imagery, that again depended. It could be as little as 8 minutes for the flight, but then when you got back, it depended a lot on the computer that you ran them on. And so some of the servers and some of the computers that the computer science department had access to, it'd be less than a second per image to run, and you might have I guess if you're doing, like, for the drone we had at 60 meters, one image covered about 1 acre of land. And so we were looking at, a minute and a half to 2 minutes of processing time on the computer for one of these surveys. But then, if I was able to also run them on the school laptop that I had, and at that point you were looking, I mean, I would say it was still relatively quickly. It was probably 30 to 40 seconds per image. So a lot of times I'd run the images overnight and then come back in the morning and they'd be all done.
That's still a considerable investment of time per wetland, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that was super interesting. Thank you, Reed. I hope you'll keep us posted in the future as this continues to progress.
Yep.
All right, we're going to keep moving on. Next item on our agenda was an update on the National Dove Task Force from Jamie. Jamie, would you please take it away?
Yep, sure. I don't have a formal presentation or anything like that. I'm just going to run through some notes, mostly because I was thinking that I was not going to be giving this today because I was supposed to be in another meeting that got canceled. But so I'm slightly underprepared, but not completely underprepared. So Dove Task Force met in early June. It's so for those of you who don't know, the Dove Task Force is made up of essentially it's well, we call it the Mark Siemens Show mostly because Mark Siemens is the bulk of the presentations. But the Dove Task Force is made up of a few representatives from the Fish and Wildlife Service and 2 representatives from each flyway, which would representing all of the management units for doves. So basically, there's 8 state biologists and a handful of feds, and so it's a pretty small group. And we just sort of shepherd, larger scale efforts towards dove management. But anyway, so Mark Siemens gave us an overview of some tweaks that he had been doing on the integrated population models. And so as a reminder, everybody, all of the management units now, the WMU, EMU, and CMU, we all have an integrated population model that is what is being used to base our hunting regulations on. Those have all been approved by all the various flyways and stuff. Mark just showed us a couple of things that he's been looking at, but in general, he's really pleased with how the IPMs are performing. And I can't give you more than that because my notes actually say, look at Mark's slides. I don't have Mark's slides. He hasn't given them to me yet, so I don't have any further details that I can share with you on that. Sorry. Because it's like trying to take a Scott Boomer presentation and regurgitate that. You need his slides in order to do it. We talked a decent amount about the harvest strategy. There's an update coming. It's been 20 years since, more than 20 years since the harvest strategy for doves has been updated. The flyways will have an opportunity to comment on it. During those discussions, we spent a lot of time discussing habitat and currently we're using definitions from 1959 for dove habitat. And so, these really need some updating. We talked about using MLCD, is BCR appropriate? So there's still some decisions that need to come on that. And we spent a fair amount of time talking about what would the different harvest packages be. And as of right now, we don't see going different than where we're at now, which would be a 15 bird bag, a 10 bird bag, or a closed season. Mark showed us some work that he had done. Looking at those optimal, like think about the duck AHM matrix and how if we wanted a moderate season, it's a really thin sliver and small chance that you get it. It's even more minute for doves. You're either shooting 15, you're shooting 10, or you're shooting nothing. So, but he still had some work on that to do, and he ran it on different scenarios. So he ran them on that package of 3 or package of 2. He looked at what if it was what were you at half of MSY? What was it if you were on the 98% shoulder? And really what it came down to is those harvest packages probably aren't going to change, but they still could. More to come on that. Again, flyways will have the opportunity to comment on it. We talked, let's see. Yeah, Mark gave us the doom and gloom presentation about what happens if all of the data streams cease to exist because the federal government just completely shuts down everything, conservation related. And so we had those discussions. Like, his words were, reduced federal support is likely but not certain. So that's why he wanted to have that conversation. And so, what does it look like if BBL doesn't collect banding data anymore? Or what if BBL ceases to exist? What do we do with that information? And we talked about some hypotheticals. What happens if we need to replace the parts collection survey? Can states run a part collection survey? What can we do if we can't band birds anymore? What are some other things that we can do? And there was talks of resurrecting the call count survey because, like some other things, the Dove world has moved to using the Lincoln-Peterson estimator to determine population, and without banding, you can't do a Lincoln-Peterson. So that would be like, we would have to reinstitute the call count survey. So it was just a nice exercise of we really need to start thinking and talking about some of this stuff more than just in what if situations in the hospitality suite. And let's see, we finished up with white-winged dove. They revised their harvest strategy, and for the WMU, they approved that, and it went into effect for last fall. And probably the biggest thing I think that came out of that was, instead of having a 10-bird ceiling on white-winged doves, they now have a 15-bird aggregate. So that was beneficial to a couple of states that are high white-wing states. They can now shoot more white wings. And then I think the last thing we talked about was Rachel Van Osdol is now a postdoc at Colorado State, and she is doing an IPM for white-winged doves in Texas, and looking at a bunch of stuff, and she had some very preliminary information to provide to us about whether or not an IPM for white wings in Texas is going to work. And that's sort of the high level stuff. Or I know we're crunched on time, and I don't want to spend too many details on stuff. I think Dave Scott is the only other person in the room here that was part of this. And so, Dave, if you think there was anything egregious that I missed on this,
you covered it well. I was virtual and I wasn't able to attend all of it, but I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay. If there's any, there will be a report coming out of this. So I will distribute that when the report is done. It's something that we started last year. Mark wanted to make sure we're capturing everything that the Dove Task Force is doing. So when that report is finalized, I'll circulate it. And if anybody has any questions specific to the Dove Task Force, you can catch me offline, and I'd be happy to answer.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jamie. That was pretty thorough. I have a follow-up question for you. The harvest strategy updates, is there a timeline? When is that imminent, or is in the near future, distant future?
Yeah, I think the answer is near future. I think we want this done and in place to be used during next year's regulation setting cycle, if I remember correctly, Dave. So I think sometime
Mark put together a draft harvest strategy update document that I know he shared with some of us internally, and I think he's going to share that back with the Dove Task Force and or you guys take it to your various tech sections. But the short and sweet of it is we should hear something, have some kind of update, maybe for our summer meeting.
Right.
And then for the technical committees that deal with doves between now and next winter. That's my guess.
Do you think that should be on council's agenda for this upcoming September, or do you think they can just wait to approve that at their spring meeting?
I think it would be appropriate for Taylor, if he's still the chair of the EMU, to provide an update to council on where we are.
Okay. Taylor is not, but I will get with Kara Nitschke, who is Georgia's migratory bird biologist and is the chair of the EMU. I'll get with her and remind her that she may not even know about this yet because, anyway.
That's
Oren,
why I think it's a little bit early,
Yeah.
but somebody who's representing either the technical committee
Yep.
or the task force on behalf of the technical committee could give council an update.
Yeah, I think that's supposed to be me. When Mark, Oren, I'll work with you to work with Todd to get that I think they're shooting for that, but man, Dave, do you really think they're going to have that ready for getting us? I don't think so either. I mean, I think
it might be an informational update at this meeting, so council is prepared for what they may be dealing with early in 2026.
Yeah, I think it's probably more that they'll see something more detailed in the spring meeting at the spring meeting, or
Okay, sounds good. Well, I'll maybe just drop something on their agenda, and it can even be that brief to just get it on their radar.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Questions for Jamie? Not seeing any. Gonna keep moving along. Next agenda item, duck population estimation workshop hosted by DU, Mike Brazier.
Thank you, Oren. I will try to keep this brief, and it shouldn't be too much of a problem because we don't have a ton of updates from the last time. I gave a quick update to this group last month, right? Does that sound familiar?
We didn't have a June meeting, so we last met in May, which would have preceded the.
Okay, all right. Maybe that was a different group then. I'm going to share my screen if I can find the right one. I don't have a presentation. I will kind of step down through the agenda that we pulled together for this workshop and provide a little bit of context on how it came to be, what we discussed, and then what some of the next steps are. It was June 2nd and 3rd at Patuxent. This came about following the Duck Symposium of early 2024 when we had that. One of the plenaries was introducing a number of these emerging topics and sort of findings regarding shifting sex ratios in duck populations and their implications for both population demographics, population trajectories, estimation of duck populations using some of the methods that are in place right now, as well as trying to understand the mechanisms that may be responsible for those shifting sex ratios. And so our staff and our senior leadership was interested in our scientists becoming aware of this because of its implications, potential implications for conservation work in the prairies and some of the breeding areas if the mechanisms were tied to that landscape and that time of the year, as well as overall awareness and communication to our senior volunteers and other segments of our members and supporters. So that's kind of how Ducks Unlimited came to be the one to try to pull this together. And there were it took a lot of time to reach out to the different groups and different people. I know there's been some questions about, whether state level flyway representatives were to be included in this. If I had to go back and do it again, I'd probably do that. I'd probably include some state representatives because one of the things we tried to do was keep the meeting pretty small. It got a little big just from a remote standpoint. And so we would do that a little bit differently, but I this presentation here and anything subsequent is an effort to keep y'all in the loop, get you in the loop, and let you know where we are. No decisions were made, anything of that nature. We had some series of outcomes from DU's perspective, and also Thomas Rickey was very influential and useful in helping us structure this workshop, the presenters, the content, and from our standpoint, it was wanting to take the temperature of cross-section of that scientific community, that the ones that are heavily engaged in some of this research, and begin to understand what they think some of the implications might be for population estimation, and some of the other things I mentioned. And then from our standpoint also, how does Ducks Unlimited then begin to position itself to assist the waterfowl management community in communicating about some of these pretty meaty issues? We had a series of presentations and discussion, question and answer afterwards. There was a lot of interest in this. We had good participation. We had about 15 or so people in person, and then at various times we had 25 to 30 people join us online. Most of those were Fish and Wildlife Service folks that had been connected to some of the, either Fish and Wildlife Service folks or some of the actual researchers. We did invite and include the flyway representatives from each of the 4 flyways, the Fish and Wildlife Service flyway reps, to at least have that connection, and that is what helped lead to this discussion. Some of the presentations that we heard were ones that many of you will have heard before, such as ones from Ray, maybe an update on band reporting rates and some of that work from Scott Boomer and Todd Arnold. We did hear about some new methods and new work that folks like Guthrie and John Yiser are doing. We also had representation from the joint U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Canadian Wildlife Service, Waterfowl Breeding Population Habitat Survey Oversight Committee, I think is kind of what it's called. They gave an update on what they're doing. We heard from the usual list of presenters here: Todd, Maddie Lohman, Ben Sedinger, Dave Coons, Mitch, Dan Gibson, and Thomas, on some of the new work on sex ratio analyses and possible mechanisms behind that. And day 2, we got into a little bit of a discussion about the potential for remote sensing tools to help modernize data collection efforts in the future, mostly as it relates to habitat conditions, let's say on the prairies. Patrick Donnelly, who is now with Ducks Unlimited, gave an example of that. There are many efforts that are afoot that are attempting to do that. That was just one example. And then we spent a fair bit of time among that group hearing, trying to, and this is really what we were trying to get to, is like, for those, the researchers and some of the analytical technicians working with these data every day, what's the sense of the group in terms of our understanding, our level of uncertainty around what these different data sets and different analytical methods are suggesting to us regarding the shifting sex ratios, the implications for population estimation, what some of the outstanding and high priority research needs might be, what efforts are ongoing, are there opportunities for synergy among some of those groups, and then a fair bit of discussion about the communication side of things. That was an interesting discussion because, of course, our federal partners are very limited in what they can or are willing to communicate about until some of these things are like at the final stage. Whereas there parts of that group, other parts of the group were of the mindset that, hey, our constituents are already hearing about these things. they're asking questions about these things. There's sort of a credibility issue that is in the air. If we don't talk about it in some way, share what we know, share what is being done, folks like Thomas and Mitch, as well as, of course, our Ducks Unlimited crew was sort of viewed things through that lens. And so anyway, that was a really interesting aspect of the discussion. Where we are now, what we ended up doing towards the end of that meeting was ask people, we put together a little Google form and asked people to list their 5 or 6 highest priority science needs, or what they viewed as the highest priority science needs or uncertainties. And I have all of those. I need to assemble those and sort of synthesize those. And that's what's on my plate for today and tomorrow. And then we're going to go through some sort of rudimentary sort of ranking system among the people that were in attendance to see where that, just to get a rough temperature. We acknowledge that there's going to be different, it's not going to be a fully representative sample. We're not going to suggest that it is, but just to get some sense of, are there 1 or 2 of these things that people coalesce around in terms of being super high priority for moving forward on? And then where do we go from there? We haven't made any decisions there. We do have, I'm going to stop sharing now. We did record all of the presentations. We recorded the exchange. We have downloaded all of those videos and separated them out into the individual presentations. I've not had anyone tell me that they were opposed to having those videos shared. So we're going to work something up where we can share all of that, and we'll hope to get that done probably within the next month, and get that out to folks. So we stayed away from any discussions related to, this was our biggest fear going in, but we didn't have any issue with this, of staying away from a discussion about the implications of this for harvest management models or anything of that nature. So unfortunately, Thomas Rickey, who was to be a pivotal figure in helping to lead this, came down with COVID like the 2 days prior to this, and he had to spend the entire 2 days in his hotel room and wasn't able to engage as much as he would like to have. So we missed a lot of what Thomas could have brought to that. But I did speak with Thomas last week. Or maybe it was early this week. He's in Alaska for the next 2 weeks, but he and folks like Scott Boomer and a few other people are collaborating on. I don't want to try to characterize it too specifically, but some of these questions, some of the looking deeper into the data to figure out, well, really, what is our level of confidence around the sex ratio estimates? I think we had heard, one of the things I can share is that at the Duck Symposium and maybe in some pieces of material shortly after, there was some intimation that sex ratios might be biased up to 4-to-1 males to females. Thomas and others are like, number one, based on additional analyses that they've done, number one, that's essentially biologically implausible given the current vital rates that we have. And some other refinements to whatever analyses they've been doing or models they've been running suggest it might be more like 2.5-to-1, 3-to-1 at the high end or something like that. Thomas was also suggesting maybe there's a different way of presenting this sex ratio metric. Instead of a ratio of males to females, maybe it's percent males versus percent female, or percent males, which gets it to be, then the difference between like 2.5 to 3-to-1 is much smaller on that proportional scale. So anyway, there's some thoughts still occurring on how best to communicate this. And then there are still some folks that are going to say we need to look deeper into some of the data sets that we're using to derive these sex ratio estimates, namely the harvest data set, because it features prominently in some of these analyses. That was another not surprising thing to come out of this, is some folks are like, we need to scrutinize that part of the data set a little deeper. So it was a good discussion, and I think Dave was able to attend most of that. I don't know if he has anything to add, but Dave, I'll let you add anything, and then we'll take questions.
Well, I was not able to see all of it. It was virtual, but there were really good presentations and discussions that took place. So I think it was a really good step forward for the community to kind of come around some of these issues that have been out there for a while. I will, a little segue what I did yesterday when Ariel sent out to the research committee a call for start thinking about ideas for our winter meeting and who we might want to have for that Lucanen, speaker special session. I reminded folks that Mike had helped organize this workshop, and I know we haven't got a summary, but I thought that conversation being there may be either a topic or a speaker or some type of follow-up that might be really interesting to our flyway that we could start planning on. So I just threw that out there as one possible idea as a next step that specifically involves all of you. But it was good from what I could see, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of it.
So Dave, to that point, I replied to that email just to share with this group. I don't know if Ariel has advanced that anywhere, but Dan Gibson's presentation was the one that I found really interesting. I saw a version of it, as many of you did, at the Duck Symposium, but he did some different things in this one where he showed what the sex ratios are based on one of the current estimation methods, maybe that's derived from Lincoln Peterson. But then he showed what the sex ratios would be and what their trend would be over time if they were estimated as sort of an emergent property using demographic rates, not using the Lincoln Peterson method. And there were some important differences there, which raised some questions about, well, what's responsible for that? Dan also presented some data that looked at differences in sex ratios between different species that occupy vastly different sort of biomes and geographies in North America and have different life histories, cavity nesters versus ground nesters. And so that type of comparative analysis across different life histories, some people opined that, maybe that's hinting at some of these patterns emerging from the data streams themselves, some biases in the data rather than what's happening demographically. And so still some uncertainty in the minds of folks, which was, from a science and inquiry standpoint, pretty exciting thing that everybody, that we still have some questions, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, and you have those presentations, and so as we all start thinking about next steps, not only from this, but what we want to do as a group, you might be able to share that.
Yes. Yeah, that's the plan. Like I said, I sent out an email to all the presenters asking if they had any objections to sharing these with a larger group, and sort of acknowledging that if we put something out there, even to sort of a smaller controlled group, the flyways, having them distributed there, it's eventually going to get out a little bit farther. Does anybody have any objection? And I haven't heard of anything. So the flyways would be the first priority for getting those shared.
Yeah, and my thought was that some of those things, like the one you just mentioned, might be something we could share during a monthly call if we thought it was, going to be informative for this group. So anyhow, don't want to take up more of Mike's time, but I think he did a nice job of summarizing it, and there's obviously going to be some more coming from this effort.
Well, yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Dave. I had a similar thought, Dave. It seems like that would be a great starting point potentially for subjects for February 26th. But Mike and Dave, if you just engage with Ariel about that, I think that would be productive.
Do that. for sure.
Any additional questions for Mike or Dave? Okay, well, it sounds like a super interesting workshop, Mike. I look forward to seeing some of those presentations.
Okay, thanks, Oren.
Okay, keep moving along here. Next item, an update on the AHM task force meeting and some meetings that have gone on about the future of bird conservation programs. Dave, I think you mentioned you'd be willing to.
I can take on the first part of that, the AHM task force. Back in June, a couple of weeks after what workshop Mike just talked about, on June 16th and 17th, 2-hour sessions. Those 2 days back to back, we kicked off the AHM task force meeting. The types of things we obviously covered is that there was a welcome to the group and kind of set the context for why we had called this together, provided some background on some of the issues, and they ended up at this late in the second session on the second day, starting to talk about operating procedures and those types of things as they move forward. It was a little difficult because we had planned on trying to have it as an in-person meeting to allow the group to gel a little bit more, but it just wasn't possible to make that happen. But we didn't want to keep waiting. So I think it was good. I will tell you that one of the drawbacks from our Flyways perspective is that our two members, Luke and Jason from the director in Tennessee, they were both there for the first day, but they both had conflicts and were not able to attend the second 2-hour session. Jamie sat in for his director, so at least could keep him up to speed. And I texted Luke a little bit, and we've talked since that time. But we're trying to keep things moving. I will say that at the last minute, we were able to get a facilitator from the Pacific Northwest National Lab, somebody that's worked with some migrant bird issues in the past, but has no experience with harvest management. But they are good at facilitating, so we've been working with them to help guide this group. We have gone as far as scheduling the next 2 virtual meetings for this group, 2-hour sessions on August the 5th and August the 2nd, August the 5th and September the 2nd. So both of those before we'll be meeting for our summer meeting. And then a face-to-face in-person meeting is scheduled for October the 8th, which is the day after SRC is scheduled to take place at the Region 3 Minneapolis regional office. So those would be the next 3 meetings. And we've been working behind the scenes trying to, set up some of the agenda and the things that they need to tackle in each of these next meetings, including finishing their discussion on operating procedures. Then we're going to get into some of the sources of monitoring data so they're familiar with those types of things and problem framing, potential objectives and trade-offs and alternatives. But those are the discussions that are being kind of framed right now. And I would hope that Luke at least will be at the council meeting and that Luke can provide his perspective to council on how things are going. So that, in a nutshell, that's where things are. It's moving forward. It's getting rolling. I think by the time we get to early October and they have a face-to-face meeting, we should really be seeing some progress in the direction that they're going to ultimately head.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. Jamie, anything to add to that?
No, Dave covered it great. I mean, I was only in on the second meeting, and it was really getting them up to speed on why we reconvene the AHM task force. We've got big issues, and the Harvest Management Working Group needs policy guidance. They're not a policy decision entity. So they need policymakers driving some of the decisions that they got to make going forward. And so, yeah, it was interesting to be in on that. It was somewhat intimidating on my side because it was like, I'm just a duck guy. Like these guys are all like high level administrators, but yeah, no, nothing more to add.
You can imagine that, we had presentation from Boomer, kind of talked about AHM and the need for this, blowing it up or whatever, and where we were in that process. And Min provided a rethinking harvest management overview from that group. So anyhow, they're just getting started, but I do think that we'll be getting some momentum by the time we get to our summer meeting and right after that in the fall.
Okay. Yeah, I know Luke is on council's agenda to give an update on the AHM task force. It sure seems like the magnitude of that issue is just so major for U.S. duck harvest. It's enormous.
It is, and it's a big ask, and a lot of these folks have to get back up to speed on the issues, but I think they're doing a good job of keeping these meetings pretty regular so that it's not like, we met 6 months ago and they can't remember what happened the last time. So I think the fact that they're trying to touch base, relatively monthly for a couple of hours is a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Dave. Please keep us posted. All right. On this agenda item, this was something that John Brunges put on. So I think where he wanted to go with this was also to update the group on a meeting that Kevin Tribe has been organizing, kind of with the MFC members and then some NGOs like Ducks Unlimited, Delta, California Waterfowl. So John's been pretty active on that. I've been sitting in when I can. That group is how John came to share the potential AFWA resolution that you all saw recently. And that group's really been discussing some of the uncertainty federally and trying to coordinate messaging and efforts. Mike Brazier, do you have anything to add about that, or do you know what John was thinking with this agenda item?
My guess is it was awareness and wanting to keep the group informed. And it's one of those things where you don't know if it's going to lead to anything, but you feel like you need to be communicating with your colleagues across the community that care about the same things that you do, because occasionally we find ourselves in discussions with influential people at different levels. And time and again, it's demonstrated that if those influential people are hearing the same thing about a certain topic from different people, then that'll go a long way in them realizing, okay, this is important because they're telling me the same thing, and I should really start to believe it, and I should start to ask the questions. I think that was the spirit in which that was pulled together. Credit to Kevin Cry for doing so and keeping this going. And that group got together really quick that first couple of weeks and pulled together a one-pager each for the bird banding lab and migratory bird program, with some key talking points on the importance of those programs, what they do, primarily focusing on their importance for setting waterfowl hunting regulations and hunting seasons. Sort of acknowledging where the pressure points for some decision makers in this current time might be. And so we very quickly developed those documents. I suspect they made their way to your group, and then it proved valuable here recently because we've learned that a representative, Representative Bruce Westerman from Arkansas, somebody met with him. That person had contacted maybe Devney or try in advance of the meeting, got them that one pager, things to ask, things to emphasize. Apparently, Representative Westerman was not aware that the bird banding lab was part of USGS Ecosystems Mission Area. So that led to a series of questions being directed to both the bird banding lab as well as the Fish and Wildlife Service Migratory Bird Program about the importance of banding data, where the banding program is, whether the Fish and Wildlife Service does any banding on its own, et cetera, asking all the right questions, information pulled from some of those talking points that your colleagues sort of pulled together. So you never know what type of opportunities are going to be presented, but having the information handy was valuable. And don't know what's going to happen now, but you've got people, the right people, asking the right questions of the right people. And there's not a whole lot more that you can do unless you're one of those decision makers.
Thanks, Mike. That was very helpful summary of that group. And I agree. I've learned a lot just by listening in. And I think there's a lot of value in that coordination, communication, and consistent messaging. So John's been pretty active on our behalf, and hopefully he'll continue to do so.
Yep. Yeah, and there's policy staff from DU and Delta involved in that as well. Cal Waterfowl is on there. So having all those touch points, all those people is it's valuable, and we're keeping it going. Kevin sort of renewed that series for a few more weeks, so we'll continue to do that.
Okay, I think that's a good summary of that topic. We'll keep moving here. Thank you, Mike. Next up, two-tier working group, Houston Havens.
Thanks, Warren. I'm going to pull up some bullet notes here, so let me know if questions pop up as we go. We can stop or take them at the end if there are any. And Dave, certainly chime in as well if I leave out anything. But I guess one of the biggest things to share from our more recent meetings is it's looking more and more like winter 2026 before the flyways will take up any recommendation or proposal for a next phase of this two-tier licensing system. Progress is slowed as we expected from the recent Fish and Wildlife Service personnel shuffling, people taking on additional roles, things like that. And so that has really kind of slowed down our ability to make progress. So we feel like that's the way that we're headed now. And if it does come to the flyways in winter 26, then if approved, implementation of phase 2 would begin in fall of 2027. Let's see. Final report.
I think the key point there that Houston's making is that the final report comes out early September, just about the time that we're all meeting and dealing with a lot of other things. And there's not really a lot of time to get into it, understand it. And so I think we're actually slowing down to the pace that we should be on so that we can kind of make some informed decisions and discussions in the winter.
Yeah, that's right. We knew from the get-go it was an extremely ambitious timeline that we were pursuing, but feel like it's probably more appropriate where we are now. So like Dave said, that final report, early September is when it's due, and so maybe we can have some meaningful discussion about that final report. We know a lot of what's in the report from the updates we've been getting, but having that official document to be able to go on to build ideas for potential phase 2 will be helpful. Let's see. So things that the working group will be looking at pretty soon is how do we monitor potential biological impacts of phase 2, whether or not a environmental assessment will be required, and that'll kind of depend on what scale phase 2 looks like. We will need to decide what metrics we're looking at for kind of evaluation of phase 2, whether that's R3 variables or biological impacts, looking at financial costs and administrative burden of just implementation of it. And we should get a better idea of those type things again from that phase 2 or phase 1 final report. Other things we'll be looking at soon are what do we need as far as state participation. Our discussion so far have kind of centered around maybe looking at 2 or more states per flyway for this phase 2. Some discussion around having a northern state and a southern state, just kind of geographic distribution there per flyway. And then there's been some discussion on using states with high harvest of species with reduced bag limits. So things like scaup, maybe mottled ducks, redheads, cans, just to kind of have a test case for what might happen with higher harvest states that have those species that we may be a little more concerned about. And then we'll also be talking about would full implementation after phase 2 be done at the flyway scale, or would it still be just individual states that it's open to? And those are questions that we've had all along. We're still, not completely sure of what that would look like. But again, that's a full implementation after phase 2. So there's still some time to work out what that would look like. I guess kind of moving forward a little bit, states that think they might be interested in phase 2 should probably still be looking into their state processes, laying any groundwork that they need to ahead of time just to be able to pull it off if that could be an issue for states. I know Arizona is on the working group and they are currently going through that process as well, just being sure that they could actually pull it off if they're part of phase 2. That was all I had for just a brief update, but if there's any questions about things that have been discussed, I'd be glad to take those.
Thank you, Houston. Any questions for Houston? Houston, will the working group be meeting between now and our in-person meeting?
We don't have our next meeting scheduled unless I've missed it here recently. We had a pretty significant scheduling snafu with our last one. Mark Vatiska didn't get the memo that he was basically our key presenter in our last working group meeting. And so we're looking to get that rescheduled. But I think the biggest thing between now and our in-person meeting will be the final report from phase 1.
Yeah, I hope we do have at least one more meeting, but it's not currently on the books. So I know Cooper's on leave this week, so maybe here shortly we'll be able to schedule, maybe reschedule Mark Fratiska to actually do what he was supposed to do last time.
Right.
But it sounds like the next big step will be the release of the final report from Nebraska and South Dakota.
Yeah, it'd be helpful if we continued our discussions as a group before we all go to our, summer meetings. But I think there's been at least reasonable progress, as Houston outlined, for folks going into seeing the final report and then continuing to have opportunity to talk about things before we get to the winter meeting.
I know council wants to have something from us or have some discussion about two-tier in September. And I'm just trying to think about how, if there isn't a recommendation, which I think is a good thing, I'm much more comfortable with this timeline, but how are we going to have a structured conversation and then convey that conversation to council? Houston, do you have any thoughts on how we would coordinate that?
So this will be a topic in HD committee, is that right?
Oh, you're right. It would probably be HD. Yeah. And so Nate's HD chair. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, other than, what's in a committee report as far as discussion, it'd still be pretty difficult, without a formal recommendation or anything for council to act on. I guess we'll just need to be mindful of that we include as much detail as we can in that report that goes to the council.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're almost going to be plopping the report down on their desk saying, we just got this. So they'll get it. We'll be able to give them a summary. But for whether what Houston just talked about or what comes out of the HG committee that says there's been progress, there's been conversations among the flyways. Here's some of the initial thoughts, and now we finally have the report, and we plan on taking this up, and you'll get something more substantial, in the winter.
Yeah, it won't be a situation where any other flyway does anything different, right? I mean, we're all
Better not
should
be, because we all sort of agreed on the timeline.
right.
Okay, well, Houston, why don't you, Nate, and I just continue our discussion to make sure this is covered in the HD committee, which I think is consistent with our previous discussions with Nate. So as agendas start circulating, let's just make sure that gets covered.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Houston. And Dave, any last questions on that? All right, hearing none. Black-bellied whistling duck working group, Jason and Houston. I'll turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, I'll start off here. Again, no presentation here, just kind of an update of progress made so far. This black-bellied whistling duck working group, we've met twice so far, once in May, once in June. Essentially, initially to kind of outline the problem statement here, a lot of which was kind of already done that y'all have seen in that February proposal. A lot of that initial discussion too was, based around available data, what we have, what would be most appropriate to use in this. Of those data sources, considerations of spring banding, that we do a little bit here in Louisiana, preseason banding, but the majority of that's done out of efficiency and convenience during the spring season when those birds are grouped up before breeding. So questions about that, kind of like, can this be used and corrected for estimates of survival, harvest rate, or even abundance estimates, and would this be maybe perhaps the best way to go about that, in addition to those sources too that were cited in February, eBird or Breeding Birds Survey, to get at estimates of abundance or relative abundance. Also, kind of defining the population. I think what we're looking at going with right now is kind of a defining it as a semi-closed population, Louisiana population of black bellies. Some initial data that we have shows not a whole lot of movement, not any migratory movements, large scale, from these birds in Louisiana, and also not a lot of harvest outside of Louisiana banded birds. Obviously, nobody else is really banding in great numbers. So all we've got to go there really is what we've banded in the past. So yeah, all of that's kind of where that goes, or where we land on that in the coming weeks and month. We'll kind of define where we settle on management goals, which we've got kind of some potential goals outlined right now, which would include establishing kind of a harvest rate goal, maybe a total harvest goal based on a potential take limit. Dave did hook us up with Michael Wells with Fish and Wildlife Service, who's done some work on those potential take limits, similar to some of the cormorant stuff that some of those northern states worked on not too far in the past. Another one was a potential growth rate goal. The goal to minimize the continued expansion and increase of this population here, especially in some of these industrial and urban settings. And then also a potential goal of reduction in depredation kill applications and permits that Wildlife Services has to deal with during kind of off-season time periods. So yeah, in addition to that, there was a kind of a separate and smaller group meeting in June with Pam. Michael was there, Josh as well. That discussion was based more so on the inputs to the potential take. So a population estimate there is really the sticking point for a lot of these potential goals. So we really got to figure out what we're going to use for that population estimate. In addition to been working on devising a harvest management strategy. What we've got so far here is much more conservative than the past kind of top-down request of the teal season 6 bird bag in addition to 6 that we saw in the winter here. So that I'm going to keep that in pocket right now because we still internally have to discuss that, and as well. Some folks above me here with LDWF they've seen it. I don't have the input on that yet. So, but again, I think conservative is the way to go in the interim anyway. If we want to get any movement on this. Let's see here. So we'll still, within that too, we'll still maintain a plan for hunter compliance, and the big reason we want to go conservative on that is because of concerns for non-target species, and especially primarily mottled ducks here on the coast. One thing too is the big question of, can we move to preseason banding versus that spring banding? There's had some discussion with Pam about the limitations of that, and are there appropriate correction factors for the data we get out of spring banding versus preseason banding. Here within the state, we've increased our allocation of time and resources to preseason banding. Now, whether we can make that work efficiently and still get mottled ducks and wood ducks banded remains to be seen, but we're putting a concerted effort into that, and then perhaps, maybe, hopefully, ideally, we've moved to complete preseason or summer banding, if possible, in the future, to inform some of these demographic rates that we're interested in. Also wanting to look at differential harvest rates between the urban industrial birds versus those rural out in the rest of the state, away from those grain elevators, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And might there be some differences in movement and survival? And then in addition to, some future research that's kind of we're working on currently too, would be contingent on an early season. And that being, what are we doing to behaviorally? What are these birds doing behaviorally as a result of that increased actually being targeted pressure from an early season? Does that make our problem worse in urban and industrial settings? We've had some communication with some neighboring states here in the South, Texas and Florida, just really to engage them and find out some interest at this point, similar to the other states within our flyway. Nobody's interested in joining now, but at best, give support and monitor kind of what we can accomplish and maybe join in the future. That's it, I think. One last thing was, and I don't even know if will be effectual from one standpoint or another, but from the insistence of some politicians and agency folks within Louisiana, I think Fish and Wildlife Service is scheduled a visit down here at the end of September, maybe October. I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything that's been squashed, or anyway, it was in the works. trip to Louisiana to see, not that it was necessary, but to see, verify the problems that we have. So I'll stop there, and if anybody's got anything to add that I've forgotten. Oh, as far as time frame too, yeah. Hoping to, we'll meet again next week, next Tuesday, to kind of discuss the draft plan. Kind of maybe hopefully finalize some of the ideas of what we're going to use for these inputs and the harvest goal as well. And then hopefully have a finished proposal before an August meeting for y'all to review, and then this will be an agenda item in September. So
Okay, well, that's a lot of progress on that front. Thank you, Jason, for summarizing. It all sounded positive and productive to me. I don't necessarily have any questions on my end. Anybody have any questions for Jason?
Hey, Orrin, I would just add kudos to Jason. We're called a working group, but we're really just people that have come up with ideas, and then Jason works on them. So been a lot of progress in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we benefited from Pam and Josh Julie and Mike Wells from the service helping, working behind the scenes. I think Drew Fowler's been involved in some of our conversations. So yeah, it's been a group effort, and hopefully we'll be in a good place in September.
Okay. Sounds good. So,
Jason, I'm sorry. This is Pam. Jason, I should have asked you this last week. So from the political perspective, we want to reduce depredation permits. Are you getting political? Or is Wildlife Services? Or is the time and personnel an issue for pressure coming from them politically? I'm just sort of interested. Are they really mad because they're having to get calls about black-bellied whistling ducks?
well, Wildlife Services isn't per se mad. It's business for them. But so there's political pressure coming from operators, facility managers at some of these grain loading facilities, because they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on abatement practices between lights, lasers, manpower. Plus, Wildlife Services is giving them assistance in abatement as well. I know at least at one of these facilities, they've got a kind of a contract with Wildlife Service, with some folks with Wildlife Service to do abatement on a daily basis. They're asking for kill permits, and those asks have increased in the years, and those asks have come from more and more facilities. There's, depending on the length of river you look at, somewhere between 7 and 9 of these facilities on the river. They're getting kill permits now for 2,000. 2 of them are at 2,000 each. They want 20,000 each facility. So yeah, the Wildlife Services is permitted to take 2,000 at each. Those requests are going to keep going up. So when they get told no, we're only taking 2,000. Well, next step is calling a congressman. So
yeah, okay. No, thanks for that clarification, Jason.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jason, we'll have an agenda item on this in August, and we should expect to see something ahead of the September meeting.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Just make sure the procedures manual states that recommendations have to be distributed a minimum of 7 days before the meeting. Okay.
I would actually, I've got an ambitious goal to have that for you in by our August monthly meeting, if we're still having one.
Yep.
That way I can gather input from the whole Flyway group.
Yes, we're planning on an August virtual meeting to hopefully address these types of issues and prepare for our September in-person meeting. So that sounds ideal to me.
And Orrin, I know that the last note that some of us got from Jason was that he's talked to Kevin Cry in Texas. And, I've encouraged him in Houston representing us to make sure that we get any kind of proposal and invite for discussion to the Atlantic and the Central Flyways. I sent the original draft proposals, so to speak, the really rough one that we got from Jason to the other flyway reps as a heads up, not to distribute, but that everybody needs to know that something's coming, and we want to, at least not have them saying we didn't tell them what's going on, and hopefully we have their support. So that's an important step.
Yeah. Yep, I think at the very least, informing them will be important. Thank you, Dave and Jason, for keeping that on your radar. All right, I'm going to quickly turn to September here. The first thing I want to remind everyone is to please make your room reservations. The deadline for room reservations is August 7th. So it's a full month before the meeting. I think last I'd heard from Adam is that he had 30 reservations for the entire, the 4 groups that meet. So if you're going to the meeting, please make your reservations. That is important for the host to get the agreed upon contract rates. So if you haven't done so already, please write yourself a note and make those room reservations. Adam, are you on? Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, so I guess the 2 things I would say is make your room reservation as soon as you absolutely can so that we can get a decent idea of who's coming. Second is, if you are a person who normally comes to this meeting and know that you cannot, please let me know that so that I can not count on you. Registration, it looks like, is going to be $250. That may still be a little bit in flux, but it won't go down by much. So probably best to plan on that. That's really all I have at this moment.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. It's going to come up quick. I'm going to share my screen real quick and just show you all kind of the agenda. Is the Excel spreadsheet with the major topics and potential recommendations coming through. Okay, so we have a lot on our plate for September. We potentially have a lot. These were the topics that I am tracking as of now. Please, if you hear of anything that I'm missing, please let me know. Or if you have questions or concerns about these, either procedurally or about the content, let me know. And then for the tech reps I added kind of on the right-hand column here, a lead tech rep. So these are the people that we're going to be relying upon to present and advance these topics. So please take a moment and scan that list to see if I've identified you as a lead. Make sure that you're comfortable with that. If not, circle back with me.
Hey, Oren, can you zoom in a little bit, please?
Sure. Is that better, Houston?
Yep.
Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing any questions here. So then I'll just flip to the schedule of the committees. It's pretty much the same, I think. Maybe with one slight adjustment was that I moved banding to be before lunch on Monday in order to accommodate a speaker in the Habitat Committee. Our current plan on Monday morning is to have a kind of joint general session with non-game and then have the SWAN committee. So that could be a joint SWAN committee meeting, and then begin the banding committee jointly so that the BDL update can go to both NVTS and GBTS at the same time. and then the banding committees can go their separate ways from there. So if any committee chairs have any questions about where their time slots are concerned, please let me know. Here's just a brief look at some of the topics I'm thinking we have. And I have held a couple open slots here in case we have any urgent or high priority speakers we want to put into that general session 1. I have at least one slot open. So please be thinking of that if any important subjects come up.
Hey, Oren, do
Go
we
ahead,
have, I don't see environmental issues. Am I crazy?
Nope, you're not crazy. If Sam's still on here, Sam can jump in. I think that Sam is not going to be able to attend, and as the new committee chair, he and I talked about just the EIC committee not meeting in September.
Yeah, Oren, that's correct. I'm going to be on paternity leave starting September 1st, probably. So if there's something that needs to happen, it can certainly happen. Let me know. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd just say we are going to have a pretty significant consumption advisory coming out here at the end of the month, and I thought it would be a opportunity to let the folks know about some stuff that we found here in Wisconsin.
So
so again, just whether it's in, I don't know, wherever you guys want to throw me, but I think it's probably going to be something that we're going to want to be aware of.
Well, we could put you in the first general session or the second general session if you want to be in a time slot there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need a ton of time. It's just, it'll be just one of those ones where giving everyone a heads up that this is coming down the pipe.
I'll circle back with you on this, Taylor. Thanks for making me aware. And Sam, don't let me forget this either. Okay. Thank you, Taylor. Any other questions, comments, concerns about September? Gonna be here before we know it. Let's all keep thinking about it.
Hey, Oren.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Houston.
Yeah, not to put you on the spot too much or anything, but do you want to kind of remind people about the roundtable and what we were thinking there?
Sure. So this was an idea that I bounced off several of you, and really kind of originated with Reed and I talking about what's going on in each of our state agencies. And I think it's really can be a pretty informal opportunity for state agencies to just share very briefly 1 or 2 interesting, relevant, or hot topics that are going on in their state that we're not going to cover in other flyway business. So it could be you've got a new rulemaking process or a controversial issue that you think others might benefit from. I'm just thinking about a very brief way for us to communicate amongst state agencies. You know, we all talk about this individually at points, but I think it would benefit us all to have an opportunity to share information. Again, it's just an idea. If it doesn't go well, we don't need to try it in the future, but just an idea for us to further collaborate in it. Kind of informal. It'll be off the record. My hope is that it can be kind of informal, casual, almost like a round robin of choose 1 or 2 topics you want to share with your flyway colleagues in a very concise manner. Does that make sense? Is there still interest in that? Okay. All right. Well, I apologize for holding you all late. I appreciate everybody's attendance. Are there any questions, lingering subject that we need to cover? Jamie, go ahead.
Yeah, really quickly, guys. I just wanted to, this is a Treasury update. If you recall, the council directed the planning committee to come up with a company to do an audit on the books and things like, you know, the finances. And since that time, the Tennessee Wildlife Foundation has come to us and said they've had a bunch of staffing issues, and they have requested to step away from being the keepers of our books. So they basically said, you need to find another set of bookkeepers before October 1st. So I'm just sort of letting you know that the planning committee has sort of like done a reshuffle. They're not really looking for an audit anymore. They're actually now in the process of looking for a new set of bookkeepers. And over the last couple of days, that's what I've been working on with Joe, and we've been sitting and talking with some bookkeeping firms. So there are going to be changes coming up with Treasury. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what it's going to be. I will keep you all informed as it goes along, but I would say this. So things are going to change, but don't expect there to be any major hiccups or problems with getting payments out. I really think it's going to be a seamless process. I don't think anybody's going to notice it, and it's happening at a good time. It's like October, we are really slowed down with payments. So anyway, just to let you know that there are things that are still happening. Doesn't affect you guys directly, but it is in direct response to things that the tech section and our partners in Canada have, expressed and brought up. And good on Oren for really tasking council to deal with some of these issues. And they are dealing with it, but now we're just dealing with a different thing before we get back to the audit thing. That's going to happen, but we need a bookkeeper way more than we need an audit.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Perhaps this is an opportunity to take some of that feedback or concerns and build that into that relationship from the beginning. Yeah, that sounds really significant. Appreciate all your efforts on that. Please keep us posted. Okay, well, that was an important update. Appreciate you sharing that, Jamie. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you all for spending your time. I thought it was a productive meeting. Look forward to seeing everyone in August. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
See y'all.
Jillian, you still on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. How did we do?
Good.
Good deal. Okay. So has John talked to you about hosting this at all, or any of the recording or anything like that? No. Okay. Well, we can probably stop recording. We'll just